She was 40 years old, driving through Belgium in a military jeep, and she had taken a wrong turn. That sentence sounds almost comedic, except the road was behind enemy lines. The year 1944, she was not a soldier, nor a trained field agent, and had no reason to be near the front lines. She was a socialite, an heiress. She had hunted lions in Africa. She had thrown parties in Newport that people still talked about decades later. She had been handed more privilege in a single year than most people accumulate across a lifetime. And now she was about to become the only American woman captured as a POW on German soil during World War II. Her name was Gertrude Sanford Legendre. Her story raises a question we still haven't answered honestly. We talk about women in intelligence as martyrs or forgotten heroes, dismissed and overlooked. They proved everyone wrong through sacrifice. Gertrude Legendre was none of those things. Overestimated by some, underestimated by others, remembered by almost no one. Not because history erased her, but because she chose to step back from it herself. You will have to decide what she was: a genuine intelligence officer born rich, or a wealthy adventurer who treated World War II like a safari, an extraordinary experience for those who could afford the risk. The truth, as it almost always is, sits somewhere between those two questions. Gertrude Sanford was born in 1902 into extraordinary inherited American wealth. Her father, John Sanford, built a fortune on carpet manufacturing in Amsterdam, New York. Their Gilded Age society money transformed into pure, total freedom from ordinary life's constraints. The Sanfords didn't worry about how to make a living. They worried about how to live. Gertrude took to that challenge with an intensity that distinguished her even among the wealthy. She was educated in the way wealthy women of her era were, incompletely and decredibly focused on languages and social grace rather than analytical thinking or professional training. She spoke French fluently. She moved easily through European drawing rooms. She understood the codes and rituals of the international elite, having grown up inside that world. But Gertrude Sanford was bored. That detail matters more than it might seem. Biographies of intelligence officers are filled with bored people trapped in ordinary circumstances. For Gertrude, the trap was made of silk and silver. She was expected to marry well, to entertain magnificently, to age gracefully into the role her class had prepared for her. She did marry well, in the conventional sense. Sydney Legendre was charming, wealthy, and adventurous. The two of them built a life together that read like the fulfillment of every expectation. They entertained at Medway, their stunning plantation estate in South Carolina. They traveled constantly. They moved through the world with the ease of people to whom no door was ever really closed. And then they went hunting. Not for small game, not for anything comfortable. They went to Africa and to the jungles of Southeast Asia and to wild places. They hunted animals that could kill them. And Gertrude discovered something about herself the drawing rooms of Newport had never revealed. She was not afraid. This was not a minor personality detail. Fear is what keeps most human beings from doing dangerous things. Gertrude Legendre seems to have lacked a standard issue relationship with physical danger. Or she had one and simply overrode it with a will that was, by every account, formidable. She wrote about her hunting expeditions in a book called The Sand Ceased to Move. She was a good writer, precise and unromanticized in her observations, with a keen eye for the behavioral details of the animals she tracked, and, less comfortably, the human beings and the cultures she passed through. Reading that book today, you can see the intelligence officer she would become. Someone who noticed everything, who catalogs detail obsessively, who was interested in the mechanics of how things actually worked beneath their surfaces. When the war came, Gertrude Legendre did not hesitate. The Office of Strategic Services was established in 1942 under the command of General William Donovan. It was, by the standards of American institutional life, a remarkably unusual organization. Donovan wanted intelligence professionals, but also people with particular skills, who spoke languages and traveled widely. He sought those who knew foreign cultures from the inside, not just from textbooks. He wanted people comfortable in ambiguous situations, who could improvise and had social confidence, to walk into a room full of strangers and extract information without anyone noticing. In short, he wanted wealthy, cosmopolitan women who moved effortlessly through European society. The O.S.S attracted many such women, more than any previous American intelligence endeavor. They served in roles ranging from analytical to genuinely operational. Gertrude Legendre joined the O.S.S in 1942. She was 40 years old and fluent in French. She had connections throughout European society, product of decades of social movement across 3 continents. On paper, she was exactly what Donovan was looking for. What is less clear, and what her own later writings leave ambiguous, is what she actually did. She worked in Washington initially, processing intelligence traffic, learning tradecraft of signals analysis, and document handling. She then transferred to London, working at O.S.S offices in Grosvenor Square, handling communications intelligence, specifically naval and shipping intelligence, that was critical to understanding German movements in the North Atlantic. This was real work, not glamorous. It was painstaking, detail-intensive analytical labor that forms the unsexy backbone of all intelligence operations. You read intercepts, you cross-reference shipping manifests, you build a picture of enemy logistics one data point at a time. People who do this work well stay focused on minutiae for hours without losing the thread. They hold multiple overlapping datasets in their minds simultaneously, and understand that getting a small thing wrong in intelligence analysis can cost lives. By accounts of colleagues, Gertrude Legendre was good at this work. Not famous for it, not decorated. Good at it in the way that competent professionals are good at things reliably and without drama. But here's the tension at the center of her story. She was also a socialite in wartime London, which was still, despite the bombs and rationing, a place where social life continued among a certain class. She attended dinners, she cultivated relationships with allied officers and diplomats. She moved through a world where intelligence gathering and social gathering had always been the same activity. Was she gathering intelligence deliberately in those social settings? Probably. Was she also simply enjoying herself? Almost certainly. The two things are not mutually exclusive, but they are also not the same thing. Gertrude Legendre, perceptive enough to understand how her circumstances appeared to others, chose never to clarify. In the summer of 1944, after Allied landings in Normandy pushed German forces eastward, Gertrude Legendre was reassigned to continental Europe, specifically to a liaison role in Paris that involved coordinating intelligence sharing between OSS operations and Allied intelligence services. This was not a field operative role in the traditional sense. She was not running agents. She was not conducting surveillance. She was a senior intelligence officer with excellent language skills and better social connections, facilitating the complex interpersonal work that makes coalition intelligence function. And then came September 1944. The exact sequence of events leading to her capture has been disputed, including her own. What is established is this. On September 23, 1944, Gertrude Legendre was traveling by vehicle near the Belgian town of Wallendorf with other OSS personnel. The front lines at that point were fluid, contested, and in some areas poorly marked. Whether through navigational error, faulty intelligence, or both, their jeep drove into German territory. They were captured almost immediately. The moment of capture shifts Gertrude Legendre's story entirely. She was no longer an intelligence analyst, or a society hostess, or a big game hunter. She was a prisoner, a woman in German military custody. She was also, almost certainly, terrified, although she would describe the experience later with a characteristic composure that makes it difficult to read the emotional reality beneath the surface of her account. She destroyed her identification documents during or immediately after capture. That act is significant. She understood, in the moment of crisis, what it meant to have her true identity discovered. She was not panicking. She was thinking. The German military's handling of Gertrude Legendre was almost surreally civilized. This fact deserves examination rather than simple gratitude. She was taken initially to a German military headquarters, then to a facility under house arrest, rather than the brutal imprisonment that characterized German treatment of other captured personnel, and certainly rather than the systematic murder being carried out in camps across the Reich. Why the differential treatment? Several factors intersected. She presented herself as a civilian official. Her documents had been destroyed. She was an American woman of considerable social poise, who spoke European languages and carried herself with the authority of someone to whom deference was a lifelong experience. The German officers who dealt with her were, in some cases, aristocratic Europeans from her social world. They understood what she was. They also, in the collapsing context of autumn 1944, had reasons to handle prisoners carefully. She was held for approximately 6 months. During that time, she moved through a series of locations in Germany, under guard but not in the conditions of ordinary imprisonment. She ate with her captors in some instances. She was treated, in her own careful words, correctly. What she was asked, what she revealed, what she withheld, and what the Germans actually learned from her presence is not fully documented. The OSS conducted a debriefing after her escape and return. The contents remain classified or lost. What Gertrude Legendre said about her captivity in a memoir, published decades later, is measured and selective, in ways that are themselves informative. She was a woman trained to understand the strategic significance of what she did and did not say. The question that hangs over her captivity is the same question that hangs over her entire intelligence career. How much was the product of her intelligence training, her courage, and her operational discipline? And how much was the product of her class, her social connections, her wealth, and the particular protections that accrue to a certain kind of person even in wartime? The honest answer is that both things were true simultaneously, and that separating them is probably impossible. In the chaotic final weeks of the war in Europe, as the Allied advance made the German position increasingly untenable, Gertrude Legendre escaped. The mechanism of that escape is one of the more unusual details in a story filled with unusual details. She walked out, not alone, and not entirely of her own initiative, but effectively. She crossed into Switzerland in the company of a Swiss diplomat. He was navigating the diplomatic no man's land of a collapsing regime, and she was free. The image is striking and also, if you examine it carefully, revealing she did not tunnel out. She did not overpower guards. She did not execute a clandestine extraction with an OSS team. She exited through a door that was held open by social and diplomatic connections, by the residual functioning of pre-war European civilian structures, by the kind of access her background made possible, unavailable to a working-class American soldier. She arrived in Switzerland in February 1945 and was subsequently returned to Allied control. The war in Europe ended 3 months later. She was debriefed by OSS, she returned to Washington, she returned eventually to Medway to South Carolina, to the plantation and the parties and the life that had been waiting for her all along, and then she was quiet about it. For decades, this is the most interesting thing about Gertrude Legendre. More interesting than the capture, more interesting than the captivity, more interesting even than the escape. She came back from a singular wartime experience, an experience that would have launched the career of any public figure with less money, and made the reputation of any woman without her advantages, and she largely declined to use it. She wrote her memoir, The Sands Ceased to Move, which covered her pre-war adventures. She eventually wrote a separate account of her wartime experience, but it was published decades after the events it described, and it was not the kind of first-person testimony of wartime intelligence service that might have made her a household name. She did not seek the recognition. She did not pursue the celebrity. She did not position herself as a forgotten heroine who deserved a belated reckoning. She went home, and she lived her life. And she died in 2000 at the age of 97, having outlasted most of the people who had served alongside her, most of the German officers who had held her captive, and most of the context that would have made her story immediately legible to a general audience. Here is what we can say with confidence about Gertrude Sanford Legendre. She served in a genuine intelligence capacity during the Second World War. She handled real intelligence in a serious analytical role. She was captured in circumstances that were the result of wartime contingency rather than incompetence. She conducted herself during captivity in a manner that her own service judged satisfactory. She escaped, she returned. Here is what we cannot say with confidence. We cannot say whether her wartime service reflected the same driven professionalism that her hunting expeditions reflected, or whether the OSS represented, for her, a particularly high-stakes version of the same restless adventuring. We cannot say what she told the Germans during her captivity, or what they told her, or what she withheld from the OSS in her debriefing. We cannot say whether her post-war silence was principled, discretion, or simply the behavior of someone who had gotten what she wanted. What we can observe is the shape of her story, and what that shape reveals about the way class operates in the telling of historical memory. The women we remember from the OSS, and from Allied intelligence services of the Second World War, tend to be women who needed recognition. Virginia Hall needed recognition because she was a professional who had few other options. Violet Chabot needed recognition posthumously because she had given everything and received nothing. Noor Inayat Khan needed recognition because the official record had initially treated her contribution as minor when it was, in fact, extraordinary. These women were remembered, in part, because their recognition mattered materially to their legacies or to the legacies of those who loved them. Gertrude Legendre did not need recognition. She had Medway. She had the Sanford fortune. She had a life of sufficient richness that any single component of it, including a wartime adventure that ended in German captivity, was simply one chapter among many. And there is something uncomfortable in that observation, something worth sitting with rather than resolving too quickly. The privilege that protected her in German captivity. That made her treatment so different from the treatment of other prisoners. That gave her access to diplomatic channels for her escape. That allowed her to return to a life of ease and comfort afterward. That same privilege may also be the reason her story has fallen into a quiet corner of history. While the stories of less fortunate women have been told and retold with the urgency that scarcity of recognition creates, we remember the forgotten heroes most urgently when their forgetting feels like an injustice. When Gertrude Legendre is forgotten, it is harder to identify exactly whose injustice that is. She was captured, and she survived, and she came home. Whether that makes her a hero depends on what you think heroism requires. Sacrifice. She risked her life, but she also had resources that made that risk substantially less likely to end in her death. Courage, she appears to have had it, genuinely and in full measure. Service she served, and by available accounts she served capably. Or perhaps the question itself is the wrong one. Perhaps the more interesting question is what it means that a woman of her intelligence, her capability, and her experience chose, afterward, to step out of the frame of history. Not because she was pushed out, not because she was overlooked, but because she could. She had hunted the biggest game the world offered. She had worked in the most consequential intelligence organization of its time. She had been captured by an enemy power and had walked away from it on her own terms. And then she went home to South Carolina and tended a garden and lived another 55 years. There is a name carved nowhere particularly prominent. There is a memoir that most people have never read. There is a record in the OSS archives that researchers occasionally find and are startled by. And there is this question, which she left behind her like a trail in grass that has since grown over. If you have everything, and you risk everything, and you survive everything, what exactly is it that you are fighting for? She never said. She walked away from that answer the same way she walked out of Germany. Calmly, deliberately, without looking back.